throw a bat on stage, and every night we do a gig, you get all these crazy people that come and throw this junk on stage, and and I thought it was one of these rubber bats.
Picture this. It's past midnight backstage in some dimly lit whiskey-soaked dressing room. The Prince of Darkness, Ozzy Osbourne, leans back in his chair with a distant look, eyes swimming with decades of chaos, love, and deafening applause. But tonight, he's not talking about madness. He's talking about magic, the kind only certain women in rock ever gave him. Stevie Nicks was the first name to leave his lips. He once described her voice as a ghost wrapping around your spine. Soft, chilling, unforgettable. From the moment he heard her sing Rhiannon, something inside Ozzy shifted. It was more than admiration, it was recognition. There was a mystic to Stevie that Ozzy never forgot, a kindred wildness wrapped in velvet and shadows. They didn't just share a moment in history, they shared an ache, an unspoken bond of spiritual chaos, drugs, darkness, and dreams too vivid to survive. In the early 18s, when Ozzy was on the brink, spiraling under the weight of his demons, it was Stevie who found him backstage. No press, no spotlight, just two shattered icons, collapsed in the same backstage room, trading broken pieces of themselves like lifelines. She didn't console him with words. She simply sat beside him. And that silence screamed louder than any crowd ever had. To him, Stevie wasn't just a voice. She was a mirror with feathers and eyeliner, a haunting presence that reminded him beauty could still rise from ashes, that ghosts don't always haunt, they sometimes heal. Next, he talked about Ann Wilson, the thunder goddess of Hard Ozzy admired power, but Ann's was a different kind. It wasn't chaotic or wild. It was steady, seismic, rooted in something ancient. Her voice wasn't just powerful, it was a reckoning. On a shared bill during a European tour, Ozzy remembers standing silently at the side of the stage, eyes wide, heart thudding, as Ann unleashed a note that seemed to tear open the sky. It wasn't just awe, it was surrender. They never shared headlines, never tangled in scandals, but what they shared ran deeper, unshakable respect. She didn't command attention with flames or spectacle, she didn't need to. Ann sang like she was casting spells. With one breath, she could hush a stadium. With one lyric, she could make Ozzy, the madman, the icon, the chaos incarnate, stand still. And that's what struck him most, her stillness, her strength that didn't shout. For someone who built a kingdom on madness, Ann reminded him of the quiet truths, those rare, sacred things that don't need to be loud to be unforgettable.
It's kind of like saying, people say, "Hey man, it's Ozzy." You know, it's like, you gotta go, instantly, you gotta go, "I'm Ozzy," man. It's like, I'm...
He then turned to Debbie Harry, the rebel queen. Ozzy called her punk royalty, with a blade in her smile. And it wasn't just a nickname, it was a warning and a compliment rolled into one. They met at a chaotic after-party in New York. Blondie had just blown the roof off CBGB, and Ozzy was already 3 drinks too deep, teetering between charm and mayhem. Debbie didn't flinch. She lit a cigarette, narrowed her eyes, and told him to shut up because she wanted to hear the Ramones. That moment cut through the noise. Ozzy laughed, fell a little in love, and never forgot it. There was a defiance in her, a queen who needed no court. She didn't care about his fame, his theatrics, or his chaos. She met him as an equal and challenged him with just a glance. That raw independence, the way she moved like the rules never applied to her, reminded him of what rock was always supposed to be, dangerous, effortless, and absolutely real. Years later, when they crossed paths again, the electricity was still there. No romance, no drama. Just mutual recognition of 2 icons who'd survived their own storms. Debbie wasn't just a singer to him. She was a force, a warning shot, a memory sharp enough to sting, but too beautiful to regret. Then came Joan Jett, and Ozzy's entire face lit up. "I love rock and roll." Those 4 words weren't just a lyric to him, they were a battle cry, a blood oath, a reminder that rebellion wasn't just for the boys. Joan embodied a kind of fierce independence that Ozzy always admired, but rarely encountered. She didn't just play with fire, she was fire. They crossed paths often, but one moment burned into his memory. Backstage in 1984, Ozzy was unraveling, drugs, doubt, the darkness creeping in. Joan walked in like a blade, calm and sharp. "Pull yourself together, man," she said. No drama, no pity, just fire in her voice. And somehow, in that single sentence, she reminded him of who he was. Joan didn't need theatrics. She didn't have to scream or tear things down. She stood still, unwavering, and the world bent around her. She was cold steel wrapped in leather and eyeliner, the kind of warrior Ozzy would go to battle with, or against, without hesitation. He didn't just admire her, he revered her. Because Joan Jett didn't just survive rock and roll, she conquered it. On her terms, with no apologies and no surrender. When he brought up Patti Smith, his voice softened. Ozzy once called her the priestess of punk. She wasn't a friend in the traditional sense, but her presence haunted his quieter moments, like a hymn half remembered. Her voice wasn't loud in his life, but it was always there, whispering through pages and echoing from speakers when the world got too heavy. He read Just Kids like scripture, word by word like confessions scribbled in blood and ink. It wasn't just her rage or pain that pulled him in. It was her purity, her refusal to be anything but herself. For a man whose entire life was wrapped in performance and spectacle, Patti's raw poetry felt like a lifeline. In 1995, they crossed paths at a London event. No paparazzi flashbulbs, no grand greetings, just a nod, quiet, eternal. That single gesture said more than any conversation ever could. Two souls scarred by music, by fame, by living too loudly for too long, finding peace in mutual recognition. She didn't need to say a word. She had already spoken to him in ways no one else ever had. And finally, there was Lita Ford. Of all the women, she was the one who truly walked through the same fire. Their paths were messy, volatile, and soaked in both brilliance and destruction. They didn't just collaborate, they collided. In the studio, their voices danced between agony and beauty. Offstage, their bond was equally powerful. One forged through pain, resilience, and the kind of wild loyalty that only two survivors can understand. Their duet, Close My Eyes Forever, wasn't just a song, it was a lifeline. Behind every note, there were sleepless nights, backstage arguments, broken bottles, and quiet apologies. But there was also laughter, healing, and moments of raw, unfiltered connection that neither of them could ever recreate with anyone else. Ozzy never forgot how Lita stared down the chaos of the rock world like she owned it. She didn't flinch when others doubted her, didn't falter when the spotlight got cruel. She stood tall, leather-clad and unshakable. And Ozzy, in all his madness, saw her not as a colleague, but as a sister in arms. She wasn't just part of his story. She was one of the few who helped write the chapters he thought he'd never survive. Of all the women, she was the one he knew best. They worked together, fought, laughed, screamed. Lita wasn't just a name on a list. She was part of his story. Their duet, Close My Eyes Forever, wasn't just a song. It was a moment in time where two survivors looked at each other and said, "We're still here." Through the fog of addiction, through the fire of fame, Lita stood her ground, and Ozzy loved her for it. 6 names, 6 storms, each woman unforgettable, each one leaving fingerprints on the madness that shaped Ozzy's world. And in his eyes, they weren't just rock women, they were rock warrior survivors, with scars like battle paint, with voices that could summon shadows and silence chaos. To Ozzy, these weren't just tributes, they were confessions, an offering to the muses who kept him from vanishing inside his own darkness. Glimpses into a soul shaped by blood, by memory, by the piercing howls of guitar strings and the lullabies of a broken past. Each name wasn't just a favorite, they were lifelines, wrapped in eyeliner and steel. These women didn't just survive rock's violent current, They became its fiercest waves, crashing against every boundary, reshaping the shorelines of what women in music could be. And in his final breath of reflection, Ozzy didn't just admire them, he thanked them for saving parts of him the world never even saw, for showing him time and time again that even in the darkest noise, beauty could rise. 6 names, 6 storms, each one a monument to defiance, each one carved into the history of a man who spent his life screaming into the abyss, only to be answered by voices stronger than fate.